got questions? You guys can ask any marijuana question you want. I work.
Let's thank Andrew.
I do this not only in Colorado, but I do this all nationally. And so any state you guys are interested in, or the politics, or whether to vote yes or no on Proposition BB, just shoot it. I love that, all that stuff.
What impact is, or where do things stand with the banking problem?
Okay, banking. Fascinating. So did any of you guys recently see, I know this is kind of weird news, so maybe not. How many people know about Fourth Quarter Credit Union and the fact that Colorado is trying to start a credit union just for marijuana? Yeah, all right, great. I'm talking to a libertarian crowd. You guys like banking and pot. Okay, so Colorado, 2014 legislative session passed a law which said we want to try to create a marijuana-only specific credit union. The governor was on board. The governor's office really is trying to solve the banking issue because it's a problem for them, violence-wise. They don't want people getting shot because there's a lot of money around. Also, it makes it really hard for their tax collectors to collect tax money when it's all in cash. And the business owners, as much as they don't want to pay all those taxes, they really have a lot of trouble in dealing with the cash. It's just, labor. It's a lot of labor. Okay, so Fourth Quarter Credit Union is trying to get access to the money system that operates nationally. They try to go through the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. They're having some issues there. And they're trying to deal with the bureaucracy. They say, okay, what if we're just in the state, we just deal with marijuana businesses, we have a charter from the state of Colorado. Really, all they should have to do is say to the Federal Reserve, because you need a master account from the Fed, that says, we have a charter from the state, we need to get a master account. Federal Reserve said, go screw yourself. We don't want to give this to you. And they did, maybe not the best idea, but something all of us here probably really wish we could do. They sued the Federal Reserve.
Yes.
And now here's what happened. Yeah. So the Federal Reserve, just like last Friday, put out their briefs, their side, and they were like, no, absolutely not. This is all federally illegal. Any banking entity which is touching marijuana is violating federal law, and there's no way to make any of that legal without changing federal law. Which means not only are all the money that marijuana businesses are collecting illegal, but the tax money they're paying to the state is also illegal. Which means right? So this is hilarious. So one of the things we were spitballing around, and of course this wouldn't actually happen. There'd be no way to get this passed through the State House. But how hilarious would it be if you passed a law that said, okay, any bank which banks the state of Colorado's marijuana tax money has to accept marijuana money from the businesses themselves. Because the bank, I'm trying to remember, I think it's Chase, I'm trying to remember exactly which bank, maybe Chase, that banks the state of Colorado's general funds and things like that, does not touch marijuana business accounts. It's crazy, right? So that's some there. There's lots of different ways we're trying to deal with it. One of it is by working with some small state banks. Colorado National Bank was taking some accounts and is trying to work through it, but they're having problems now. And there's just so many different federal agencies and sub-agencies, and the Office of the OCC, the Office Comptroller of the Currency, deals with this as well. And all it takes is one person to say no, go screw yourself. It takes 36 different bureaucrats to say yes. And so this is why this is an issue. Laura?
I just want to say that the federal government is very happy to take your federal withholding for your employees.
Exactly.
You have to pay that federal withholding for your employees to the federal government.
So, we all can agree that taxation and the way of tax collection is not fair at all. And the reality is that the same agencies which are unwilling to help you gain access to a bank in order to run your business are more than happy to say, I want all the tax money you owe me, and also even more tax money that you owe me because of some strange quirks in the law, Section 280E, which basically prevents normal businesses from writing off all their normal business deductions besides cost of goods sold. So they say, we need all your money, but we're not going to help you collect any of that money in a way that's efficient, and you're going to have to potentially come to the state agency and pay us in truckloads of cash, or go to a Western Union and get money orders to pay us, and it's insanely inefficient.
Are there any statistics on the price of marijuana prior to the legalization and after the legalization, and what the impact of the tax and the extreme tax that's in place on the legal side, how it props up the price on the illegal side?
Yeah. So it's one of those interesting things, right? Because we've got a couple of factors coming in, right? On one end, and it's important to recognize that looking at Colorado and just saying like, okay, let's look at the price in Colorado is somewhat of a fallacy, because black market prices, as I discussed at the beginning, like laws of gravity, fluctuates beyond the borders of Colorado. So an occurrence like what's happening this last summer in California, where they have a drought, will actually affect the black market prices much, much more than something like in Colorado and the amount of taxes, which would buoy up those prices, right? Because we have supply and demand nationally on the black market will change some of those black market forces. So in around 2006, 2007 to 2008, as when I was mentioning, many of these patient caregiver systems started blossoming, the supply of cannabis on the illegal market really rose a lot. So I have some friends who were in the game for a long time in Colorado, and they were telling me that in the mid 2000s, before that boom, they were getting like $3,500, $4,000 a pound, which is kind of what it goes for in areas of like New York City now. But in Colorado, they were making a huge amount of money. And now the black market price is roughly equivalent to the legal market price at around between $1,800 to $2,400 a pound. So in some cases, a drop of almost 100%. Now, as far as statistics, let's say we looked at Colorado in 2008 or 2010, and we say, how was the price dropping, and then the adult use side, and how high those taxes are. Now, there aren't really exact numbers for, let's look at the black market prices through those points. But it is important to realize that the prices in Colorado from a start on the adult use side were high, but it was only partially to do with the taxes. It was more so to do with the limited supply on the adult use market when the markets first started opening in January, February, and March of 2014. So that difference in supply and demand boosted those prices up, upwards of $50 to $60 an eighth, where now they've dropped even after, even with taxes included, closer to $35 to $40 an eighth. Black market prices are, if you do purchase on the black market, probably lower than that, probably closer to about $20 or $25 an eighth, but that's about what the medical price is as well. But it's it would be an interesting experiment to see if you could exactly get the prices in black market in Colorado from before and after. But my thought is that the forces of supply and demand outweigh the forces of the taxes.
I'm curious what, if anything, is explaining the big shift in public opinion about marijuana legalization in the past decade or two.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me like the two dominant strains of activism on the topic have been either, let's find people who already agree with freedom on some particular issue, or let's publish a lot of policy studies to educate whoever gets elected. And this doesn't seem to have taken either of those routes.
Yeah.
So do you have any idea what is behind that?
So I think it's a lot of it is just actually, I'm going to link this into approval vote. This is the same sort of thing. It's the same sort of part of the American psyche and really of political psyche, which makes people not want to quote unquote waste their vote. It's that people are afraid of being in a minority when it comes to I support this or I'm on the out, but they don't want to be on the end of the bandwagon when it comes to supporting a majority opinion. And so because of that, people are looking at this and say, okay, I want to feel as though I was on the forefront of this, but always believed it at the time. But back when it was controversial and taboo, I was still in the closet. In the same, it's those sort of aspect in our politics that make people want to support things that are already popular, but afraid to maybe openly support things that aren't yet popular. Now, this idea probably doesn't resonate with this group as much because we're a group of libertarians and we love liberty, and still for some reason that's controversial in the United States, but we're open to being open about that. It's the same sort of thing that, once we got towards 50% and above 50%, people are wanting to jump on the bandwagon and saying, no, this is sensible, I support this, because they don't want to feel like they were left in the back. Sure.
I think the answer to this guy's question was aging demographics. The teenagers who smoked pot back in the 60s and 70s are legislators now. Okay? Those are the people who vote. Those are the people who, I mean, half of my high school back in 1978 smoked pot. Those people are all in their 50s now, so it's changing.
Yeah, no,
When I was 17 years old, the people who were running this country were 70 years old, and they didn't like pot at all. It was never going to happen. But now those people are gone, and it's just aging demographics.
To some extent, it is aging demographics, but that doesn't explain why it happened so fast. So if you look at, for instance, where the American public was in 2005 versus where the American public is in 2015, yes, that's a decade of shift when it comes to who's in power, but there has been a large amount of change in all age demographics. Even when you adjust it backwards, you say, okay, where was this age cohort from the age of 40 through 65? And where did that age cohort support marijuana? There's a tipping point, which has really opened those floodgates in somewhat of a similar way to gay marriage, in which lots of people potentially either it wasn't a main issue that they were concerned about, or it was something that they probably supported, but they felt as though there were other peers in their community they couldn't be open about that support in the same way. And then once it became politically tenable and the majority held opinion was that way, they were a lot more open about it. And with a lot of these issues, all it takes is people talking to each other, and they realize that one side doesn't make any sense, and one side maybe makes more sense. So yes, it's absolutely a combination of the both. I like to refer to it as generational renewal, which is essentially a really nice way to say new people come into things. Things cycle. It's the way the country works. But I think it's important to look at how fast things shifted, and that's where kind of a tipping point analysis comes in.
Wouldn't you also see it? Sorry to interject. It's related, and it's my club, so. Wouldn't you be able to tell the difference between the legislative states and the ballot states also? Because I saw that the ballot states had more movement than the legislative states.
Yeah, and that's because with 55% of the populace, you can write an initiative and pass something. With 55% of the populace in support of something, oftentimes you don't have enough legislators to pass something. It takes a greater percentage of the population to really put the pressure on the legislators to then pass those things. On some things, they're in front of the population, but on most things, legislators are behind. Yeah,
I just kind of have a personal question. I understand that they can't use it anywhere except in their home. Is that true?
Yeah, so in Colorado, there's some places you can use, some places you can't. So you're not allowed to use openly and publicly, which means that I couldn't walk around outside on the main streets of Lafayette and smoke. Now, I could in my home. I could in a friend's home. If there are some establishments in Colorado which are experimenting with potentially whether or not they're in Nederland or down in Colorado Springs that are experimenting with kind of marijuana sort of clubs. But the real problem is a facility like this under Colorado law and federal law is actually public. And that's because it's open for public accommodation. It's in the same sort of way that this establishment can't discriminate based on with alcohol they can, but can't discriminate based upon race or gender or ethnicity. And they can't just, this has to be ADA compliant, right? So, but you can, at your own, if you had a private club that fits certain very, very limited restrictions, or if you had your home, you can discriminate, right? So it's one of those things that because it's open for public accommodation, the state is interpreting that to mean that it's open in public, or at least some jurisdictions are interpreting it that way. So that's kind of why. But over the next couple of years, hopefully that should change to a certain extent.
So I've wondered, Andrew, if there's ever been any studies as they may relate to a shift in, we'll call it drug, a shift from alcohol to marijuana, or if it's just marijuana going up. Has there been a decrease in alcohol and an increase in marijuana? Are there any studies that might correlate anything like that, or has alcohol stayed stable, particularly in Colorado?
So what you're talking about is known as the substitution effect.
Sure.
So you're looking at two different substances, and you see whether or not they are substitutes or complements. So in economics, we'll look at, let's say, something like
tax derivation. Tax derivation. Taxes down in Colorado from alcohol because they're up in marijuana?
So they're not, but it's important to look at, right? Like they could be down per person per consumer, but we don't quite know that. But Colorado's population is booming, right? So the tax revenue is still going up. Alcohol sales are still going up. Are more people consuming both? When someone wants to drink, do they both drink and smoke, and they drink more because they're smoking? Or do they drink less because they're smoking? I often found, for me, it was a substitution effect. I'm not a big alcohol consumer. For some people, maybe they're like, now I want to get really wasted, but it really probably depends upon the person. Now, interestingly enough, we have, of the limited amount of data, we have seen in states with medical marijuana laws, traffic fatalities from alcohol go down, as well as we've seen some studies that show opiate overdose in medical marijuana states go down. There's two reasons those are probably happening. One, with the opiate overdose, marijuana and opiates from a pain relief, yes, they work a little bit differently. Neuropathic pain for us, kind of other muscular pain, but to a certain extent, they're substitutes. And with people taking less opiates, or maybe a smaller amount of their opiates and some marijuana rather than a larger amount of their opiates, we see less people getting really addicted to opiates, and less people having problems with opiates, and less people dying from opiates in that way. Why it's happening with the traffic fatalities could be potentially because even though maybe more people are smoking and driving is less dangerous than drinking and driving, and that may result over time in less accidents.
I just want to confirm what you said about the opiate substitution. That's the first thing I thought of. My wife had a dispensary, and we saw a lot of people coming in that could cut their opium consumption in half or a third because they could use the marijuana as a substitute. And it was an amazing gift to those people because they couldn't function with all the opiates, but they could with much less opiates, much less constipation with marijuana.
And by opiates, you might mean prescription opiates.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Prescription drugs.
Absolutely, prescription opiates.
And that's one of the major health problems in America right now is a lot of people have chronic pain. There's a lot of undertreated pain in the U.S., but in some cases there's some overtreated pain. And so people take these, whether it's Vicodin or Percocet, and they're very addictive because that's just, opiates are addictive. And sometimes that can lead into serious addiction, and all of a sudden they don't realize it. They've had chronic pain for a while, they just take it, and now they run out of their prescription, and they're having serious withdrawal. And if anyone has known someone who has been addicted to opiates, it is extraordinarily difficult to function when you're going through withdrawal on opiates. And so that's why people are so prone to relapse and so prone to, maybe if heroin is cheaper than the prescription opiates, those are substitutes.
So you mentioned Ohio earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about what's going on in Ohio.
Oh, sure. Okay. So Ohio 2015. This is what happens when you have individuals who use direct democracy in crony ways. So you have a group of very wealthy investors who have decided, and this was a model that was run in Ohio for gambling. And so what they do is they say, okay, we're going to raise all of this money and run a campaign, a constitutional measure, which is going to say that marijuana can be grown, processed, and sold, but it can only be grown in these set locations. And we own all the land in these set locations. So there is going to only be 10 cultivators in Ohio, and all those 10 cultivators are groups of the people that invested, and I don't say donated, invested in the campaign.
Didn't somebody do that in Colorado? Tried to gambling?
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah.
The only racetrack you could run was their racetrack.
Exactly, right? So, direct democracy can be very good, but the problem is when we have, if you're going to be make hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars, please, philanthropic. Please invest in businesses. Don't invest in giving yourself a constitutional monopoly in a state to own the rights to marijuana business. So here's where the craziness is, right? It's actually doing relatively well because I guess people in Ohio don't care about corporatist oligopolies, mandated in their state constitution. They like marijuana more. What?
The land of Boehner.
Yeah. Sorry. But there's also, right, so the state of Ohio, their legislature and their governor, it's all Republicans who swept in 2010, I think. And the legislature referred an initiative to the ballot, which makes changing the Constitution to give yourself a monopoly or an oligopoly illegal. And also repeals this whole initiative. And they're both running head to head, which is going to be insane. What happens if this passes and says that marijuana is legal, but then an initiative passes and says, no, this isn't legal? What comes into place? There's just going to be a lot of lawsuits. And it's just going to be interesting to see what actually happens. It's 2015, so it's a very off year. So whether or not it hurts the progress of legalization in the future, I don't think so. Because I think the news media, if it does, will write it off as this is what happens. Americans saw through, or at least Ohioans saw through the corporatist oligopoly that was being mandated. And it's not that they voted no on marijuana. They voted no on putting that sort of language into their state constitution. That's Ohio.
I have a question about the business licenses for the marijuana industry here. I know that, for instance, when they had legal gambling in Nevada, they attached conditions that the license owners had to pass certain background check requirements. Was any of that done here?
Yeah, so essentially every single marijuana state requires some degree of background checks for license holders. In addition, in Colorado, for employees, you also have to go through some sort of background check. So that's a problem for some people because if they came from the illegal market and they had a criminal record, it particularly disenfranchises people of color and minorities, which have been most arrested for drug crimes and are disproportionately punished for those crimes. That being said, in Colorado there are some exemptions. So, like, if your crime would have been legal now and it was occurred during a certain period of time, it's not an exclusion. If it's older than 10 years old, it's not an exclusion. And it has to be a felony. So misdemeanors, again, aren't exclusions. But that also differs.
Just to answer also on that, I had to sign away my constitutional rights with the application that, to be a marijuana store and a grower and everything. You give up your constitutional rights. Your check, your background check, your finances, your everything is open to scrutiny, and that's the way it is. I don't know how it is this year.
It's very similar. So at almost any time, the inspectors can come in and look at your records in your cultivation facility or look at the records in your dispensary. So there are many things that it's what's known as a privileged license, and that privileged license is, essentially means you give certain things up to get the ability to sell marijuana and make money from it. In Colorado's, we're lucky enough to be one of the few states where people can have that choice. That being said, doesn't take away now in Colorado your constitutional rights to grow marijuana or possess it or give it to someone without payment. But in order to sell it, you need a license, and that's going back.
Can you speak about the overall effect of marijuana taxes on taxation in Colorado based on Tabor?
Yeah. Okay. So, does everyone here know about Tabor? Okay. Yeah. I'm speaking to a room of people. Okay. So, Colorado in 2013, we had to pass Proposition AA, which is basically saying, hey, Colorado voters, do you want to put a 10% sales tax, social sales tax on marijuana, as well as a special 15% excise tax on marijuana? Whenever they put out a new tax, the Blue Book has to say how much is estimated to raise, from the marijuana money, as well as how much total money is the state going to raise, total taxes. That's why the question on Proposition AA starts out as Tabor requires, which is, shall taxes be raised by $70 million in the first fiscal year of blah, 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 for this and this and this, right? So as we saw in 2014, we didn't hit the $70 million. The fiscal year is actually not exactly the calendar year. It's a little bit beyond that. And so total for the fiscal year, I think it's about $68 million. So we came pretty close to that 70, but we didn't break it, right? Which would be normally, okay, all that money goes directly to the state. We're fine. But Tabor also requires that you say how much money is the state going to totally raise. And the amount of money that was totally raised by the state was way more than expected because lots of people were moving here. The economy's booming relative to other states. Maybe young people moved here because of the awesome tech jobs or the fact that the skiing here is now so much better than California. Yes. Maybe it's because of marijuana. I don't know. Could be all three. So the reality is that the amount of money that was raised by the state in total taxes was much larger than $70 million. So all of the money would have to be refunded back. Now here's the thing. So this next session, this upcoming election, this last session, they said, okay, we got to ask the voters again, can we keep the marijuana tax money, or does it go all the way back to the people? And so there's a lot of discussion in the marijuana realm on what do we do, because there's a couple different options. So the Colorado voters voted on Amendment 64. In Amendment 64, it said the first $40 million of the excise tax money is going to go to capital school construction, what's known as the BEST Fund. Then, money beyond that is going to go towards however it's spent. Now, when we did Proposition AA, the state of Colorado said we also want to put a special tax on, special sales tax, because we need to make sure we have enough money to pay for the regulatory system. Well, the regulatory system is paid for by licensing and fees. Of course, that's how all regulatory systems are paid. They knew that, but they wanted to get more money. So there's quite a bit of funds from that, and they're looking to disperse it both on educational campaigns as well as drug treatment and recovery services, as well as some other school funding, is lots of different things. But also that $40 million that was promised in Amendment 64. So if Proposition BB passes, that money is going to be allocated to those different groups. Also, taxes go down from 15% excise tax to a 10%, from 15% excise tax to a 10% excise tax, from a 10% excise tax, from a 10% sales tax down to a 7% sales tax. If it fails, it's hard to know really whether or not those taxes still change, but if it fails, I don't think they'll change for any longer than 1 year. Probably be pushed up again. If it fails, you have money go back to the business owners. It's a relatively small amount, and then each citizen gets a check in the mail for something like, I think it's less than $100. $8. So we all get drug money. Which, if you think about it, buys, sadly, like less than a gram. Oh, see that? That's hilarious. I would think yes, because it's going to be a check from the Colorado Department of Revenue.
I think it comes off your taxes.
Comes off your taxes? It's not a rebate.
Was
I'd have to look specifically into it, but it's a small amount of money. So I mean, I'm conflicted on this, right? Because I'm someone who I want my clients to get more money because that's really like where most of the people who are going to really benefit of the marijuana businesses, right? So that'd be great for me. Hopefully, good for our business. The other way I look at it is, okay, how will a lot of the population of Colorado be angry with the fact that the money that they thought was being spent to regulate marijuana and go towards school construction and what we were promised turned out not to be true? Do we see people in other states say, Colorado didn't get any of the money, marijuana doesn't raise any money, and of course they overlook the fact that we have some complicated tax systems, and Tabor prevents a certain amount of money from being over-raised by government, and then it goes back to the people. They gloss over that, and they say that, no, marijuana doesn't create any of the revenue, it doesn't pay for itself, causes more problems than it helps. So I kind of look at this from a long and a short perspective. Me personally, although I am in general opposed to taxation, hopefully this will actually result in the future, lower taxes on marijuana based on them actually being able to use the money. And of course, the money was already collected. It's about whether or not it goes back. Personally, I'm probably going to vote yes, but it's hard to really know because for me, speaking to a bunch of libertarians, I know this is rough for me to say I will vote for a state to keep taxes. But the way I look at it is that I care about the first $40 million because that's what we promised. And as much as I dislike how some of the money is being allocated, I would rather fight to be allocated towards things that I care more about than to worry about people from other states saying that marijuana is not paying for itself and it's costing the state all this money.
Will we have to vote on this every year that the
No.
revenues are higher?
Nope. Tabor is crazy. It's crazy in good ways, right? But it's got lots of intricacies. So it's really about what was truthful on proposition, like on the Proposition AA ballot. So, I mean, if you, for instance, pass some new sort of tax and they had a similar error, they would have to potentially refund it for that tax that they raised.
Just to be clear, if this referendum passes, the tax rates will be cut for the...
Yeah, so I'd have to look back into whether or not that would happen regardless. But in the language, in what was referred to by the legislature in this last legislative session, which then goes to the vote, to do you keep taxes, do you not keep taxes, and all kind of the intricacies of that. Part of that also reduced the taxes down. This is also what resulted in, and you guys remember hearing about the pot tax holiday that happened, I think it was September 17th or 16th? Okay, so that was a quirk in Tabor because it required that you lower it down this is why Tabor's crazy, right? For a day, at least. You have to lower it down, but then it could be raised higher than that. But that had to happen before the November election, based on how the fiscal year was all lined up. So for one day, the marijuana taxes were reduced to 0. And then the next day, they were back up.
The stores did incredible.
The stores did great, yeah. And it was great marketing. They didn't even have to say it. Everyone's going to come. And I would love to work with an economist to look at some stores and see how much those tax differences over, let's say, that whole month changed the spike in demand. Personally, as someone who tracks all of the marijuana tax money and sales based on the tax receipts, because the Department of Revenue doesn't give us sales numbers, they just gives us tax revenue numbers. It's going to be really hard to know actually how much marijuana was sold in the month of September because of that blip, but I don't care. Tax-free weed day. That's good. Yeah.
Are there any more questions?
Yeah.
So I realize that you're not a professional economist, and we talked a lot about state-specific programs here. What is your kind of perspective on national market and what is going to boom here in the next, say, 5 years as far as that goes, if anything?
Yeah. Actually, I'm a professional economist. I get paid to do this. Okay, so are you talking about states or are you talking about products?
Well, I'm not talking about, Wall Street. What are we going to see on Wall Street? What are we already seeing on Wall Street? And, we don't have a lot of that interstate commerce going right now like you talked about because we can't do that federally, but still money has a way of making Wall Street and investors.
Yeah.
moot.
So institutional investors have not really touched on it yet because the margins are not nearly as good as other legal markets. Partially that's because of the tax problems. Partially that's because of the inaccessibility of economies of scale based upon national sales. So that's part of where we haven't seen institutional investment from Wall Street really come in. Now we have seen kind of more of the fringes or some of the hedge funds, some of the big just single investors. For instance, Peter Thiel of the Founders Fund, who PayPal and a bunch of others, he's a giant multi-billionaire. He invested a whole bunch into Privateer Holdings, which is a company that they own Leafly as well as Marley Natural. They bought out some of the name rights for Marley, and they have they have a large producer up in Canada that's federally legal. So we have seen some on the fringes jump in, but what I see is probably most likely we'll see investment into infused product companies, which are successfully able to create a brand that then they can license out nationally. And that's really where we'll see over probably the next 5 years or so, either the success or failure of national infused edible branding and the ability to create those IP licensing contracts with other states and expansion from there. Now, as far as states, with new states coming in like Minnesota and New York, which don't allow for flower and are really quite restrictive, I think we'll see some of the mid-sized players in the nutraceutical markets, as well as to a certain extent maybe some smaller medical device manufacturers jumping in and looking how to perfect a tincture or a vaporizer product or a sublingual strip, like a breast strip. And those sorts of real added manufacturing products, we'll see people jump in as well. And it's going to be interesting to see how do the capital requirements and regulatory requirements in a place like New York, which force only the availability of a certain product, which is going to be really, really high manufactured and really, really technologically advanced with specific cannabinoid ratios, like very precise cannabinoid ratios. How does that technology transfer to states like California or Colorado or Washington, Oregon, where more products are available and maybe the degree of advanced cannabis science just hasn't been explored to the same extent here because those capital requirements, you can make a lot of money off of a less produced product because you can sell those less produced products, whereas you couldn't in some of those states. So those are kind of one of some of the big trends.
Oh boy. All right. Let's do these last two and then we'll cut it off. Oh boy.
Was that kind of answering? You can ask more later.
It does. My only follow-up would be is what big tobacco company, for example, do we have them starting to show interest into flowering and getting involved more with this industry yet? Or is that something that we see coming in 5-10 years? And how's that going to play into the stock market and even the economy?
So if you're talking about big multinationals and international companies, it's important for them over what happens in the other countries, right? Like tobacco companies don't sell most of their tobacco in the United States. They sell most of it in Asia. Right? Asia still does not like weed. They do not like, drugs. Drug laws in most of Asia are really, really harsh. So if you sell a majority of your cigarettes in China, you're going to be less likely to have your company itself jump up and start growing marijuana. Now, that doesn't mean that the top executives or very intelligent people high up in those companies won't shift over, and we've already seen some of the knowledge from those markets start moving, whether or not it's advanced agriculture or drying techniques and others to certain areas in the cannabis realm, but they're not open about that. And most people don't know that besides people like me, who those are our clients, and that's just because people are not open about the fact that their new scientists had, 15 to 20 years at say Marlboro or, RJ Reynolds or whatever, with the learning this, specific agronomy of crop manufacturing for a specific chemical, right? People aren't open about that, but yes, it is happening. It's very unlikely that we'll see in the future the companies themselves jump in, and that's because most of these big companies you think about are international. They're not just national.
On the political side, if the wrong person gets elected president, the Department of Justice changes, what's the operational risk to all the companies in Colorado and Washington and how they're going to
So some, but probably less than we think. So my thought is like, okay, what's the worst thing that could potentially happen? I don't know who the president would be, but maybe let's say Chris Christie becomes Attorney General. Now, that's not going to happen. I'm from New Jersey originally, and I can say that asshole's not going to be the head of the Department of Justice because he's got enough of his own justice problems to deal with. So he's like being indicted by the Senate of New Jersey. That's crazy. Okay, so let's just say one of those candidates becomes, because what really matters more is the Attorney General. Like, if the Attorney General is a Republican that's just really opposed, or a Democrat that's, say really opposed, and they decide to not do what Obama's done. Because Obama, on marijuana stuff, has been generally not all that bad recently. And because what he's done is he's been relatively hands-off the states, but he's been relatively hands-on his own Justice Department. Because there's a lot of people within, maybe not necessarily specifically DOJ employees, but directly, but DEA, which is under the Department of Justice. They're like dogs biting at the bit. You got to hold them on a leash. If you have a Republican Attorney General who maybe he doesn't even come out with a new policy. Maybe he doesn't mention it at all, or he says, sure, the Obama administration policy is still in effect, or I'm working on tweaking it. Something will be out soon. Of course, nothing comes out. What the Department of Justice might do is just lay off on their own U.S. attorneys and allow those U.S. attorneys to crack down. And maybe, a different politician would have been, kept the Obama administration policy and continued to be hands-on when it comes to his own U.S. attorneys. But it's also important to recognize that, and this is something that I didn't quite know until I worked with an individual, Eric Sterling of the Criminal Justice Policy Foundation, who's been doing drug policy for decades, is that U.S. attorneys have a very large amount of autonomy. They have a large amount of ability to decide what to prosecute and what not to prosecute, what to prioritize and what not to prioritize. And I don't think that whether or not it's a Republican Attorney General or a Democratic Attorney General, I don't think someone like John Walsh in Colorado will change his behavior significantly. And I think it's that may change. And that again is important to see, like, which is interesting to think about, right? Because a change in the state U.S. attorney may matter more than a change in the Department of Justice and the Attorney General of the United States.
Still got to pull a jury from the state of Colorado.
Again, which makes jury nullification a bigger risk. So my thought is that potentially it would be an issue, but when talking to business owners, it's not the first thing on their mind. At least in states like Colorado. That might be a little different in states like Michigan, which aren't regulated.